On the western frontier of Missouri, the American Civil War was not fought by organized armies, but by neighbors. Local bands of Southern Bushwhackers waged a brutal guerrilla war against the occupying Union Army and pro-Union Jayhawkers. Loyalty to either side was dangerous, but being caught in between was often worse. His father urged him to leave the next day for Mrs. Cruiser's place, warning that tensions were about to explode. Jake refused, saying these were his people and that he would not side with the Lincoln-loving Germans. That night, gunfire shattered the quiet. Jake ran outside and saw Asa and his family being dragged from their home by Jayhawkers. The Jayhawkers demanded that Asa reveal where his son was, but he refused. They killed him where he stood, left his wife and children behind, and rode off. Jack tried to charge after them, but Jake held him back, telling him they would only be killed too. A year later, Jake and Jack joined the Bushwhackers to avenge Asa's murder. During one raid, they posed as Jayhawkers and killed several men who had aided them. Afterward, one victim's wife begged them to kill her as well, unable to live without her husband. They refused, saying they did not kill women. As they prepared to leave, one man poured gasoline on the store. Shaken, Jake pleaded with him to spare the woman and her livelihood, since they had already taken her husband. The man ignored him, set the store on fire, and the group rode away. Later, Black John led Jake and the others to rejoin George Clyde, who was accompanied by Daniel Holt, a formerly enslaved man he had freed. One man spoke to Jake and Jack about George, praising him as a dangerous fighter. He added that some men crudely referred to Holt as George's pet nigger and warned them never to say it in George's presence. Jake was uneasy at the sight of a black man carrying a gun. The man explained that Holt had grown up alongside George, that George trusted him completely, and had taught him to shoot, making him a capable fighter. Later, Jake was captured by Jayhawkers while sitting outside. They demanded to know where the others were, and he insisted he was alone. As they prepared to shoot him, the Bushwhackers suddenly opened fire from inside the house. Jake broke free and ran back inside as the Jayhawkers returned fire, struggling to aim because they could not see where the shots were coming from. John called for a ceasefire. When they could not hold the house, the Bushwhackers broke out the back and ran into the open field, firing as they went. The Jayhawkers answered with gunfire, killing several men on both sides. The fight was fierce and chaotic until the Bushwhackers reached their horses and fled, riding hard as the Jayhawkers chased after them. The captives they had taken were not real soldiers, making the exchange meaningless. Furious, the men turned on the prisoners, beating them with the intent to kill. As winter approached, the men prepared to go into hiding, arranging supplies through loyal Southern families and splitting into smaller groups. During this time, a man named Nolan returned with grim news from Jake's old neighborhood. Many people had been killed, militias were forming, and the man Jake had spared had ridden straight back to town, shot Jake's father, and dragged his body through the streets. Jake was unable to understand how mercy had been repaid with such cruelty. Jack told him he had taught the man mercy, but the lesson had been ignored. Trying to make sense of it, Jake said his father had been a Union man, like the other Germans. Nolan told him the truth was harsher. His father had not died for his politics. He died because Jake was a bushwhacker and because of the fear carried by his name. The realization left Jake shaken and deeply disillusioned. Back, George and Holt were assigned to the same group and placed under the care of a Southern man named Gable Evans, who agreed to shelter and supply them through the winter. When they met, Gable told them his son had been killed fighting at Independence. Though his wife was managing as best she could, they offered their condolences, and Gable instructed them to stay hidden, promising to visit occasionally with food. The men then moved into the woods, digging into the earth and slowly building a concealed bunker that would serve as their refuge through the winter. Not long after, they heard a horse approaching and stepped outside to see Mrs. Evans, the widow of Gable's son, arriving with food. She greeted them warmly, apologized for the delay, and explained that federal patrols had made travel dangerous. As Jake read, Holt told him his first name was Daniel, the name his mother had given him. Their conversation was cut short by gunshots. They ran back toward the bunker, where Jake caught Jack and Sue Lee together. He warned Jack at once, and the two men grabbed their weapons, left Sue Lee behind, and rode toward town. They found Mr. Evans dead, his wife crying beside him, and their daughter clinging to her. The men rode after the Jayhawkers and clashed with them in a brutal fight in the woods. Shots were exchanged at close range, and Jack was hit in the arm. George joined the fight, and when they saw how badly Jack was wounded, they pulled back and retreated. Back at the bunker, they tried to save him. George suggested amputating the arm, but Jake and Sue Lee both refused. Jake chose to cauterize the wound. He heated his knife and pressed it into the flesh. Jack screamed through clenched teeth as the others held him steady until it was done. By the next day, Jack's condition had not improved. George said he needed to ride out and find a doctor, telling Jake that if he failed, he would go on to Captain Perdee's instead. Holt would stay behind to help care for Jack and the widow. Jake agreed, wished him luck, and watched George ride off while he, Holt, and Sue Lee remained. Jack then told Jake quietly that he was dying. He said he had always believed one of them would die, and had assumed it would be Jake first. Jake broke down, saying he wished that were true. As Jack lay surrounded by those he loved, it was clear he was near the end. Holt pointed to the blackened vein creeping up Jack's arm and said there might still be a chance if they cut it off. Sue Lee and Jake agreed, and together they prepared to amputate the arm in a last attempt to save him. Jack did not survive. After a time, he passed, and the three sat in silence. Sue Lee kissed him goodbye, and Jake and Holt buried him inside the bunker. Black John gathered the men and told them they must mourn and avenge the women and sisters they had lost. He said their women had been killed in Lawrence and swore he would ride there and slaughter every soldier he found. The bushwhackers rallied behind him, mounted their horses, and rode toward Lawrence. Jake thought them fools, convinced they had no chance against Kansas's forces alone. After a long, brutal ride through the night, they reached Kansas City by morning. The bushwhackers rode into the city and began killing every man they encountered. Civilian men were dragged from their homes and cut down in the streets. On demanded to know where the army was, only to realize there was none. They were slaughtering civilians across Kansas. Buildings were set on fire. When the violence slowed, bodies were piled in the streets. Kansas forces soon picked up their trail and gave chase. The two sides collided, and the fighting turned brutal. The bushwhackers fell back into the woods, using the trees for cover as they opened fire. In the chaos, Pitt tried to shoot Jake from behind. Holt saw him and turned, but was shot by the Kansas army. George rushed to Holt, but a bullet struck George in the neck, killing him instantly. Holt collapsed beside him, crying and refusing to leave his body. Clave called to Jake, and together they dragged Holt away and mounted their horses. As they fled, Pitt fired again and hit Jake in the leg. Rage surged through Jake, but Pitt escaped, wounded and barely upright. As they spoke, a baby began to cry. Sue Lee returned holding an infant and introduced her as Grace, Jack's daughter. Jake and Holt were stunned, but glad to see the child. He spoke privately with Jake, telling him that Sue Lee had already been pregnant when she arrived, and that he believed Jake should marry her. Jake refused, saying he would not marry her, but would take care of her and the child. Clave replied that the Browns already treated her like family and wanted her safe there. When he returned, Mr. Brown soon came back with Holt and a priest. Confused, Jake asked what was happening, and Mr. Brown calmly told him he was getting married. Jake refused at once and ordered Holt to saddle the horses so they could leave, but Holt refused and told him to listen. Sue Lee asked Jake to speak with her privately. She admitted she cared for him and said she was willing to marry him. When Jake pressed her, she confessed she had lied earlier when she claimed she did not want him. After a long moment of resistance, Jake finally agreed, and the two were married. When Pitt and Turner approached them, Jake greeted them calmly and offered food, which they accepted. He asked about John and Curtin, and Pitt said both were dead, adding that he and Turner were heading to Newport for a drink. Jake raised his weapon as Holt covered Turner, but Jake could not pull the trigger. Pitt met his eyes and said he knew Jake would not do it, then turned and walked away. He and Turner offered a final goodbye and disappeared into the trees. Jake lowered his gun and told Holt he could not bring himself to kill him. Later, while Sue Lee and Grace slept, Holt quietly packed his things. Jake asked him to wake them so he could say goodbye, but Holt refused, saying he would rather leave them sleeping. He paused beside them in silence, then returned to Jake. The two men shared a final goodbye, tears in their eyes, and parted after all they had endured together.